In a corner of the world where maps forget to name the hills, where trees lean in as if to listen, where the wind does not howl but murmurs secrets through bamboo reeds, there are stories. Stories never meant to be told. Stories passed from crone to child in brittle whispers, not to teach, not to heal, but to warn. This is folk fear, a place where ancestral guilt lingers like smoke, where cursed wells still echo with weeping, and where each tale is rooted in soil too old, too haunted to forget. Here, we do not speak loudly. We do not ask the spirit to leave. We remember, we whisper, we fear. So light your candle, lock your door, and listen closely, because the dead remember, and the soil never forgets. There are villages that appear on no maps, not because they were forgotten, but because they wished to be. The village of Bansui lay tucked between fog-wrapped hills and thick-veined forests that always smelled faintly of something rotting. To enter Bansui, one had to stop listening to the birds, for even they knew not to sing too close. Only the cicadas remained, droning like ancient monks caught in a prayer that never ended. It was the end of the dry season when the stranger arrived. His cart held little, just a small clay urn, a lantern that had long stopped working, and a folded letter with no address. His face bore the exhaustion of someone not just lost, but searching for something the world told him not to find. And yes, he came, drawn by whispers from a grandmother who died with soil still under her fingernails. They buried the truth, she had said with glassy eyes, but the soil still remembers, the soil still weeps. No one welcomed him when he entered Bansui. Children peeked from behind rice paper curtains, but ducked as if punished for staring too long. The homes were sagging, roofs molded with dark moss, and the bamboo fences leaned like elders with no one left to lean on. The stranger walked until he reached a square with a stone slab in the middle, an altar, or maybe a grave. The villagers avoided it like it still breathed. A woman with sun-worn skin and a wide straw hat appeared beside him without a sound. She carried a sickle, not as a threat, but as something heavier, something sacred. Her voice was wind on dead leaves. "You're late. The soil's already weeping." He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt by the stone slab and touched the cracked earth. It felt damp, odd. There hadn't been rain in weeks, and yet the ground clung to his fingers like sweat. A bitter, metallic smell curled into his nostrils. "Where does it come from?" he asked. The woman did not look at him. "From what we buried, from what should have stayed buried." That night, the stranger stayed in an old granary that had long since been turned into a guest shelter, though no one ever visited. The floor groaned with each step, as though it too remembered too much. In the corner of the room sat a bowl of rice, charred black at the edges, left as if for someone who had died but not quite gone. He couldn't sleep. The air was too still, like the village itself was holding its breath. Then, sometime past midnight, he heard it. Soft, low, a sound like someone sobbing, but not quite human. It came not from outside, but from below, from the very floor beneath him, as if the soil had lungs, as if it mourned. He rushed outside with his old lantern, its glass cracked and blackened with age. Though the light no longer worked, he held it like a talisman. The moon was dull, veiled behind clouds that didn't move. And there, under his bare feet, the earth pulsed, just once, like a single heartbeat. From the distance, he saw her, a girl, barefoot, standing in the middle of the fallow field. She wore a white dress stained with mud. Her head hung low. Her arms dangled like wet cloth. When he called to her, she didn't move. When he approached, she didn't run. She simply turned, and he saw her face. Eyes like clay, dry and cracking at the edges. Lips pressed shut, not sealed with fear, but with silence long practiced. A tear clung to her cheek. It did not fall. It hardened there, like amber. She raised a hand and pointed toward the altar in the square. Then she vanished, not like a ghost, not like magic, but like someone never truly there to begin with. The next morning he asked the villagers about the girl. They said nothing. He pressed further, showed them a sketch, rough, old, something drawn from his grandmother's stories. Still silence, until a boy, no older than 10, stepped forward. His voice trembled. "She's the one who waters the seed." The elders scolded him, pulled him away, but the stranger had heard enough. He turned back toward the altar, the stone slab, the place where the soil wept. He remembered the stories now. Not all fields grow from sun and rain. Some need sorrow. Some need silence. And some need tears from eyes that should have never cried. That evening, as the sky bled into a shade too dark for twilight, he sat by the slab and whispered into the wind, "I've come to find you. I've come to dig. If the soil remembers, then show me what we forgot." The ground shuddered, ever so slightly. A hairline crack formed across the stone slab. And from deep beneath the village, something sighed, not in peace, but in memory, as if something buried, not heard him, but was beginning to weep again. Morning in Bansui came without sunlight. The mist was not air, it was memory. It clung to the rooftops like mourning cloth, and every rooster crow died halfway through its cry. The stranger woke before dawn, his clothes still damp from the soil's night sweat. The cracked slab in the village square gleamed faintly, as though something beneath had exhaled through stone. He left his shelter and followed the path that led past the rice paddies, now brittle and colorless. The stalks looked like ribs of the dead, bowed and hollow. Somewhere beyond the fog, water dripped steadily, slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a wound that refused to close. The woman with the straw hat, the one who'd spoken of the weeping soil, was already waiting for him. She held a clay pot filled not with water, but with salt. Her face was carved with years of drought, but her eyes held the strange calm of someone who had already buried too much. "You shouldn't have called to her," she said. "Who?" he asked. "The girl. You saw her, didn't you?" He nodded. "She doesn't belong to this season anymore." The woman sprinkled a handful of salt into the earth as she spoke. Each grain hissed when it touched the soil, like fire meeting flesh. "She was once one of us," the woman continued softly, "but the elders molded her silence. They said words had power to call drought. So when she was a child, they sealed her tongue with clay and fed her tears to the fields." The stranger's breath caught. "You mean she was offered?" "Offered?" The woman smiled without joy. "No, child, she was kept." She turned her back then, as if the air itself were listening too closely. "Don't dig near the altar again," she warned. "The soil doesn't forgive." Later that day, he followed the sound of children playing somewhere near the edge of the forest. Their laughter was brief, like the chirp of sparrows before a storm. They were stacking stones, small ones, into tiny human shapes. Each stone figure had eyes drawn in charcoal, wide, empty circles. One of the children looked up at him and whispered, "If we don't build them, she comes for us in our sleep." "Who?" he asked. "The girl with clay eyes." They all froze after saying it, as if the name itself were a trespass. The oldest child, perhaps 12, bit her own finger and smeared a line of blood across one of the stone dolls. "It's to feed the soil. If we don't feed it, it cries." He watched as they fled soon after, leaving the little idols behind, watching him. The fog thickened. Somewhere in that whiteness, he thought he saw her again, the same small figure in a mud-stained dress, watching from a distance. Her head tilted slightly, not curious, but mournful. He stepped forward. She retreated. Her feet made no sound, no mark on the earth. "Wait," he called. "Please, tell me your name." She did not answer, of course. Her mouth was still. But then she raised her hand, and the air around her trembled. The soil beneath his boots darkened. From it arose a tiny green shoot, thin as a tear track, trembling in the air. It shouldn't have been possible. Nothing had grown here for seasons. The stalk bent toward him, as if listening. Then the girl whispered, not from her lips, but through the ground itself, "Don't let them plant again." Her voice came like the sound of water running backward, soft, gurgling, full of sorrow. When he blinked, she was gone. The stalk remained, glistening with dew that smelled faintly of salt and iron. That evening, he brought the green stalk to the granary and placed it inside a bowl of water. The water turned cloudy. Within moments, a faint rhythmic tremor began beneath the floorboards, like a heart too weak to keep beating, but too stubborn to die. He felt something inside him stir, a memory not his own, a child's sob muffled beneath layers of soil, a mother's scream swallowed by ritual chants. He collapsed to his knees. The bowl cracked. The water spilled. Outside, the wind began to hum, a long, droning tone that seemed to rise from underground. He stumbled to the window and saw the villagers gathered at the square. Each carried a clay bowl pressed to their chest. Each bowl was filled with ash. At the center of the circle stood the old woman with the straw hat. "We plant tomorrow," she announced. "The land demands it." Her voice carried the weight of command, but also of fear. The stranger shouted from the window, "You can't! The soil's cursed! It bleeds!" The villagers turned toward him, their faces expressionless, their eyes dull and resigned. The woman looked up and said, "It bleeds because it hungers. We have nothing left to give but ourselves." Then she smashed her bowl on the altar stone. A fine mist of ash rose into the night, and for a moment the whole square smelled faintly of incense and blood. That night he dreamed of the girl again. She sat in the middle of the field, her clay eyes glowing faintly with moonlight. Around her were the villagers, kneeling, silent, their mouths sealed with ribbons of soil. She was trying to cry, but each tear turned to a seed before it could fall. The seeds rolled down her cheeks and buried themselves in the dirt. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with roots. "If you listen long enough," she said inside his dream, "you'll hear them whisper my name from under your feet." He blinked, gasping, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. The bowl was gone,
the stalk too. But on the floorboards, where the water had spilled, a single tear-shaped seed remained. It pulsed, faintly, alive, as if waiting. He picked it up and whispered, "What are you?" The seed shuddered. "What's left of mercy," it answered inside his skull, and then the whisper faded, carried away by the first distant sound of thunder, though the sky above Bansui remained clear.
The next morning, the drums returned. They did not sound like music, nor like any celebration. They were slow, solemn, as if someone was knocking on a coffin lid beneath the soil, waiting for the living to open it. The stranger stood near the village square, watching as the people gathered in silence. Each wore white, dirty from use, unwashed from grief, white for mourning, white for offering, white for forgetting. The woman with the straw hat, now without her hat, revealed hair the color of ash and eyes that no longer blinked unless necessary. She stood before the stone slab and held a wrapped bundle in her arms. Not large, perhaps the size of a loaf of bread, but it smelled wrong, like old sweat and something once alive. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside, seeds, dark, smooth, each wrapped in thin silk threads, red, yellow, and brown, colors of blood, flame, and earth. But it wasn't the color that made the stranger step back. It was the sound. Each seed was weeping. A faint, high-pitched sound, like a child crying into a cloth from very far away. The villagers didn't flinch. They knelt, all of them. One by one, they came forward, took a seed into their palms, and whispered to it. He couldn't hear their words, only feel their weight, like apologies or confessions. Then they walked to the edge of the fallow field and dropped the seeds into holes dug by hand. No tools, no spades, just fingers. Soil crusted beneath fingernails, blood dotted the dirt. They planted the seeds as if planting guilt, and perhaps they were. He approached the woman. "What are those?" he asked. "Remembrance, pain made physical, the last planting. You know it will kill you. It already has. This is only the ritual of our dying." She extended the final seed to him. "Yours." "I'm not from here," he said. "Blood doesn't forget boundaries," she whispered. "Your grandmother's tears watered our fields long before you were born." He looked at the seed. It was warm, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "You mean she was from here?" "She was meant to be buried here." He did not take the seed, not yet, but he followed them to the field. The same field where he'd seen the clay-eyed girl, now dotted with shallow holes and white fabric strips waving like funeral flags. The villagers began to hum, not in melody, but in rhythm, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to rise from the soil itself. Then came the smoke, thin trails from incense placed at each corner of the field. The scent was overwhelming, cinnamon, burnt honey, and something older, bone dust maybe. He looked down and realized every incense stick was planted inside a child's shoe. The girl appeared again, at the far edge, kneeling, weeping silently. He walked toward her, past the villagers,
past the offerings, past the chanting. She looked up slowly, her clay-cracked eyes dry, but her face streaked with salt. He fell to his knees beside her. "You don't want this either, do you?" She shook her head once. "Then help me stop it," he said. She reached out and touched his chest, her fingers cold, light, almost not there. In that instant, he saw flashes. A girl chained inside a granary, tears caught in a jar, villagers kneeling as she screamed behind sewn lips, a blade, a chant, a harvest that flourished for one season only, then rot, then drought, then guilt, and the silence that grew from it all. He woke, sometime later, alone in the middle of the field. All the holes had been filled, the seeds buried, the chanting gone, but the soil beneath him was breathing, slow, like something asleep, but alive, and it was warm, too warm. He stood up and saw footprints, not human, bare, small, too small for an adult. They trailed from one edge of the field to the altar stone, and there, sitting atop it, was the seed the woman had tried to give him, waiting, as if it had chosen him anyway. He did not sleep that night. He sat beside the granary, watching the moon crawl across the sky. The villagers had returned to their homes, their doors barred with string and bone charms. But he felt them, all of them, not watching him, but waiting for what would grow. He turned the seed over in his palm. It pulsed again, and this time it whispered, not aloud, but in the back of his mind. "You planted me long before you arrived." In the silence, he heard the earth weep again. And for the first time, he wept with it.
Night in Bansui was not truly night. There were no stars, no crickets, no dogs barking from distant hills, only the sound of roots shifting beneath the ground, as if something buried was remembering how to breathe. The stranger lay awake on the bamboo mat in the granary, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling, watching shadows stretch and retract as though they too were trying to escape. He hadn't lit a candle. He hadn't dared. Light, he now understood, only attracted what should not see you. And yet something was calling, not with words, with sound. From the soil beneath his back, a chant rose, soft, breathless, impossible to trace to a mouth or a voice. But it was there, pushing up through the floorboards like steam from a fevered body. He sat up, heart pounding. The sound did not stop. It flowed upward into the room, through the cracks in the wood, and then into his chest, vibrating inside him like a second heartbeat. He placed his hand on the floor and felt it. Thump. A pause. Thump. Like something buried was praying. He left the granary barefoot, the dirt cold and wet with unseen dew. The moon was a dull smear behind clouds, casting no light, but his path was clear. His feet knew where to go. The field. The cursed, freshly seeded field. It should have been silent, but it was humming. As he approached, he heard the chant again, louder, clearer. This time he heard syllables, not language, not one he knew, but something older, spoken in rhythm, in breath, in bone. He knelt, pressed his ear to the ground, and listened. The chant came from beneath, a chorus, many voices, children, women, old men, a collective of the forgotten singing beneath the soil. And then laughter, soft, twisted, mirthless, a child's laugh repeating like a broken music box. It looped, not because it was joyful, but because it didn't know how to stop. He backed away, stood, turned, and saw the girl again. She was crouched in the middle of the field, her hands digging, frenzied, desperate. Mud streaked her arms, her face. She clawed at the earth like someone trying to exhume her own memories. "Stop!" he cried. She didn't. Her fingers bled. The soil did not resist. It opened, welcomed, like it knew her, like it loved her pain. He rushed to her, fell to his knees beside her. The ground was warm, too warm, and soft, like damp skin. Together they pulled apart the earth until they uncovered hair. Long, matted, still attached to something. He gasped and tried to stop, but the girl placed a hand on his wrist and whispered, not aloud, but inside his mind, "She must be heard." And so he dug deeper, until he found mouth. Not a skull, not a full body, just a mouth, still intact, half embedded in a nest of roots, its lips dry, cracked, but slightly open, and from it the chant came, clearer than ever. The girl bowed her head. He wanted to run, but his legs refused. His body was no longer his own. The roots reached upward, curling around his feet, not to bind, but to plead. The chant rose, louder now. Other villagers were beginning to appear. One by one they came, silent as ghosts, standing along the edges of the field, eyes empty, mouths moving, mouthing the same words the buried mouth spoke. The girl looked up at him, her cracked clay eyes filled with tears she could not shed. "She is the seed," she whispered. "She was never buried. She was planted." He looked down again. The mouth was smiling. He stumbled back. The girl remained, hands in the dirt, bowing again and again as if to an altar that had grown too large to see. The villagers watched him, not with anger, not with fear, but with guilt, deep, rooted, generational. The woman with the ash-colored hair stepped forward. In her hand she held a bundle of fabric, white and rotting at the edges. She opened it slowly. Inside was a doll, made of clay. Its eyes cracked, its body shaped in the likeness of the girl. She handed it to him. "Every season we make her," she whispered. "Why?" he asked. "Because the soil remembers, and it demands a face." "Whose face?" "Whoever was taken last."
At dawn, the chanting stopped, not with a scream, not with silence, but with breath, as though the entire field exhaled. The stranger sat at the edge of the field, clay doll in his hands. The girl had vanished again, and the mouth in the soil had been swallowed by the earth as if it had never been there. But he knew. He heard it still, not in the field, not in the ground, in him. The chant, the breath, the grief. It had been planted, and it was beginning to grow.
Grain jars lined the walls of the old storehouse at the eastern edge of Ban Soi, round, heavy, sealed. Their cracked lids sat like forgotten tombstones, worn smooth by decades of sun. No one used the storehouse anymore. No one dared. It was said the rice turned bitter there, even in drought, when bitterness was all they had. And yet, the villagers still left offerings, small things, salt, ashes, pale marigolds bound in black twine, not for worship, but apology. The stranger stood before the door, the clay doll still in his hands, the weight of last night's chanting still thudding in his chest like a second uninvited heart. The door groaned open before he touched it. Not from the wind. There was no wind. It opened like something inside had finally grown tired of waiting. The air hit him, hot, damp, and scented like decayed jasmine, sweet and rotting. Rows of grain jars watched him from the shadows. Some were sealed with wax, others stitched shut with red thread. But one stood apart, unsealed, cracked, and weeping. A thin trickle of cloudy water leaked from its base, pooling into the dusty floor like a tear no one would claim. He stepped closer. The weeping grew louder, not liquid, breath, coming from inside the jar. He touched the side, warm. He pressed his ear against it. Heartbeat. And then a whisper. She still sings inside. The voice behind him made him turn sharply. The woman with the ash-colored hair stood in the doorway, holding a small bowl of white rice. Her eyes were distant, already halfway into the past. "Who sings?" he asked. "The bride." She knelt by the jar and placed the rice gently beside it. She was chosen when the rains failed, given before planting, buried with the grain to coax life from a dead sky. The stranger stepped back. "You buried a girl in rice?" "Not buried," she corrected. "Entombed, with songs, with silk, with hope." "Why her?" She looked at him, voice suddenly brittle. "Because she had the most to lose. That's the only thing the soil respects." The legend unraveled like thread pulled too tightly. In a year where nothing grew and the children began to eat pebbles soaked in broth, the elders chose a girl barely 17, beautiful, promised to a boy who'd built their home with his own hands. They wed her to the soil instead, dressed her in red, fed her sweet rice, then sealed her into the grain jar with the season's last handful of seed. She was meant to die before the planting, but she didn't. Not for a while. The boy, her lover, opened the jar too late, found her mouth torn open from screaming, her fingers bloodied from clawing the inside, her wedding dress bloated with rot and filled with rice that had turned black.
The next season's crops flourished, and the villagers said nothing. They sealed the jar again and added it to the others. The stranger ran his hand along the edge of the cracked lid. He felt it pulse beneath his palm. The bride still sang, not in joy, not in sorrow, in repetition, in memory, in need. He lifted the lid. The smell struck him first, thick with fermented grief, and then her face. Not flesh, not bone, but formed from the grain itself. Rice molded into cheeks, teeth of pearl barley, eyes hollow, empty, yet watching. Her mouth opened. A low moan rose like steam. The clay doll in his hand shivered, then cracked. From within it spilled a single black seed. It rolled across the floor and stopped at the bride's jar, resting against it like a child against a mother's leg. The moan ceased, replaced by soft humming, a lullaby in a language older than maps. The woman beside him began to cry, not loud, but steady, as if her tears had waited years for permission. She sings to the child she never birthed, she whispered. Every seed we bury is one she never got to hold. The humming grew louder. Then behind him, another sound. Footsteps. He turned. The villagers had gathered, silent, still, each holding a bowl of rice, each approaching a different jar. One by one, they placed the bowls beside the sealed grain tombs and knelt. The woman began to speak, her voice cracked from age and memory. For what we took, for what we used, for what we burned, we offer sorrow. A chant began, not sung, spoken, not beautiful, but truthful. Each line a confession, each syllable a wound. The stranger stood in the center, surrounded by jars and voices, and felt the earth shift beneath him. The seed at his feet vibrated once, then cracked open. From within a tendril rose, not green, not alive, but white and dry, like bone wrapped in silk. It reached toward the bride's jar and vanished inside. The humming stopped. The face of the bride and the jar faded, grain falling away like sand through fingers. All that remained was silence, until the girl appeared. The clay-eyed girl. She stood beside the jar, one hand gently touching its rim, the other holding something, a ribbon of red silk, torn and soaked through. She placed it in his hands. "She remembers you," she whispered. "She remembers your grandmother." "What do you mean?" "The bride is in your blood." And then she was gone. He staggered from the storehouse at dawn. The sun had still not risen, but light glowed faintly on the horizon, pale, sickly, like light seen through a body. Behind him, the grain jars wept again, not loudly, just enough to remind him, seeds don't forget, and neither do the brides beneath them.
The morning sky over Ban Sui bled yellow, too pale to be dawn, too thick to be natural. Clouds hum low like torn burial cloths, and the wind didn't move them. Stillness reigned, the kind of stillness that came before a ritual or after a death. The stranger woke to the sound of drums. Not music, not celebration. A single beat, repeated, slow, hollow. As though someone was striking the earth's ribs, waiting for it to remember its name. He stepped outside the granary. The air was heavy, humid with the scent of boiled bark and wet cloth. The villagers were gathering in the square again, this time dressed in red, not bright, festive red, but deep, wine-stained red, like dried blood rubbed into silk. They stood in a circle around the altar stone. At the center, a child no older than 8 held a drum. It was far too large for him. Its surface was gray, its skin was stitched. The stranger felt his stomach tighten. Because the skin wasn't leather, it was human. Old, toughened, tattooed with names no one spoke aloud. The ash-haired woman stepped forward. Her face was painted with soot, not to hide, but to mourn. She lifted her arms. The villagers fell silent. "The field has fed," she said, "and now it must answer." The boy raised the drumstick, wrapped in hair, tipped with bone, and struck once. The sound echoed through the village, not outward, but downward. It vibrated into the earth like a knock on a forgotten door. The villagers responded, stepping forward in rhythm, moving in a slow, circular procession. Their feet pounded the dirt with each step, each beat a plea, each movement a remembrance. The stranger watched, unable to move, not from fear, from recognition. He had seen this before, in a drawing his grandmother had kept hidden. A diagram of dancers circling a child, a drum made of skin, and the caption, "The harvest must be fed what it once devoured." The ash-haired woman approached him, holding a smaller drum. She offered it to him. He did not take it. "What is this?" he asked. "Your blood remembers the rhythm," she said. "Your family danced the first circle. Now you must close it." He stepped back. "No, this is madness." She leaned close and whispered into his ear. "Then madness is the only thing keeping the crops alive." Suddenly, the drums changed. The beat grew faster, erratic, as though the earth below was beginning to knock back. From the center of the field, steam began to rise. But it wasn't heat, it was breath. A collective exhale from the buried mouths below, moist, shivering, ancient. The ash-haired woman dropped to her knees. The villagers followed. One by one, they began weeping. Not loud, but openly. Each tear was caught in small bowls carved from bamboo, then carried to the altar. The stranger watched as the bowls filled, tears offered as rain, but rain no longer came, only what could be coaxed from sorrow. The boy at the center struck the drum again, harder. This time, the altar stone cracked. From it bled a thin line of black sap, sticky, slow, smelling of rust and flowers long dead. The villagers gasped. The chant resumed. And from the crowd stepped the girl with clay eyes. She was barefoot, draped in white this time. Her dress looked stitched from funeral wrappings. She held something in her arms, a bundle wrapped in rice cloth. She approached the altar, laid the bundle gently on the stone, and unwrapped it. Inside, a drumstick, small and smooth. But this one was different. Its tip was not bone. It was tooth. A molar, still bloodied, still warm. She handed it to the stranger. He stared at it. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because your blood is buried here too," the girl said, though her lips did not move. The boy stepped aside. The stranger took his place, lifted the drumstick, touched it to the taut human skin drum. It trembled. So did he. And when he struck it, once, just once, he heard his grandmother's scream. Not from memory, not imagined, from beneath the earth. The scream rose from under his feet, ripped through the soil, climbed into the air like a vine twisting toward the sun. The villagers did not react. They had heard it before. But for him, it broke something. The second strike came involuntarily, then the third. With each beat, memories that weren't his spilled into his mind. A girl tied inside a grain jar. A field watered with blood, not rain. His grandmother holding a knife, weeping as the harvest bloomed from soil that reeked of regret. The final beat silenced everything, even the wind. Then a voice, from the earth, from the drum, from the clay-eyed girl. It spoke one word: repent. The altar stone split, and from the crack grew a single stalk, pale, twisted, with petals shaped like eyelids. At its center, a mouth, sewn shut, but smiling. The ash-haired woman stepped forward and placed her forehead to the ground. She whispered, "The harvest bride is satisfied, for now." The villagers began to disperse. No joy, no relief, just silence and resignation. The stranger looked at the drum in his hands, then at the girl, who was now gone. But the bundle remained on the altar, the rice cloth undisturbed, and where the stalk grew, a single tear glistened on a petal. The soil had been fed, not with food, not with blood, but with memory, and it would bloom in grief once more. By the third night after the last planting, the altar stone in the village square no longer felt like stone. It pulsed faintly beneath the feet of those who dared approach. A heartbeat, a presence, a memory wrapped in stone. The villagers had stopped placing offerings on it, as though the earth had eaten enough, as though they feared it might choke. But the stranger, he could not stay away. Something about the altar called to him now, not with voices, but with heat. Each time he neared, his palms would sweat, his skin would tighten, his teeth would itch as if reacting to an old sickness. He waited until deep night, when the drums had fallen silent, when the villagers locked their doors with salt and string, when the clay-eyed girl had not appeared for hours. And then, by lantern light, he returned to the square with a spade, not to plant, but to uncover. The altar was older than the village. The ash-haired woman had said so in passing, almost as an afterthought. It wasn't built, it was found, we just placed things on it. But tonight, he wouldn't offer, he would take. The stone was heavy, but age had cracked it. Moss grew from its edges like veins. He began to dig, not at the center, but beside it, into the softened ground, where roots and water met in secret. The soil was warm again. It clung to his hands like breath. He dug deeper. Then he struck something. Not stone, not bone. Hair. Long strands, braided and brittle, woven with red string and tiny beads of rice husk. He pushed further and uncovered a doll, small, molded from husks and finger bones, its face drawn in dried blood, its body wrapped in silk, now yellow with age. He pulled it free, and suddenly the air around him shifted. A sigh, from the ground, or from within himself. He dug again, found another, then another. Soon he had uncovered dozens of them, each one different, each one buried deliberately, all beneath the altar, all shaped like children. He sat back, breath shaking, surrounded by husk dolls and remnants of something no ritual could cleanse. And then he saw the hole. Not dug, formed. A cavity beneath the altar, round, dark, breathing. He leaned closer and saw eyes staring back, two, wide, dry, made not of flesh, but of clay. They blinked once and vanished. He stumbled back, the dolls falling around him like broken prayers. And then she rose, the girl with clay eyes, but this time she didn't appear from the mist. She emerged from the hole, pulled upward by invisible hands. Her dress was torn, her arms streaked with soot. She looked older, not in years, but in sorrow. In her hands she held a small book, bound in bark, pages made of pressed rice paper. She placed it in his lap, and then she pointed at the dolls. These were never toys. They are stand-ins for those who were chosen but never planted, for the ones the soil rejected. He opened the book. Inside, names, dates, family symbols, symbols of failure. What happened to them? He asked. They were offered, but they weren't enough. She knelt beside him. Some tears are too bitter, some wombs too barren. The soil chooses. Suddenly, the wind changed. The village bells, meant to chase away spirits, began to chime, though there was no breeze. The earth around the altar rumbled softly. From the hole beneath it, steam rose again. Only this time, it smelled not of rot, but of milk, of cradle cloths, of lullabies gone stale. And then a sound, laughter, children's laughter, but twisted, mocking, looped in a circle with no joy. The dolls began to twitch. He reached for one, and it crumbled into dust. The girl did not flinch. They want to come back, but there's no place left for them. Why show me this? He asked. Because you carry one of their names. She pointed to the book. Page 17. A name, his family's crest, his grandmother's mark. Beside it, an empty space where a doll should have been drawn. He felt the world tilt. His grandmother had once been chosen, but rejected. The girl rose. Now the soil watches you. What does it want? She tilted her head. Tears or truth, whichever you can offer first. And then she stepped back into the hole, swallowed gently by the earth, as if she'd never existed at all. He remained at the altar until morning. The villagers said nothing when they found him. But that night,
None of them approached the altar. And the dolls he buried again, this time one by one, each crumbled in his hands before touching the earth. The soil would take no more substitutions, only what was real, only what it remembered.
It began with a rustle, not the kind the wind makes. There was no wind. This rustle came from within the field, soft, like fabric brushing skin, or a child crawling through dry leaves. The stranger had not slept since unearthing the dolls. The memory of play eyes blinking beneath the altar stone burned behind his own. He couldn't forget the book, the name, the missing doll. And now the rustle. It wouldn't stop, as if the soil had begun to stir in its sleep. He walked to the edge of the cursed field just before dawn. The sky was the color of bruised fruit. Muffled light spilled across rows of fresh-planted furrows. And in the center, something new. A single stalk, tall and pale green, swaying though the air around it was still. He'd seen many crops in his time, but this wasn't rice. It wasn't millet. It wasn't anything he recognized. Its stem was too slender. Its top curled slightly, like a neck craning to listen. He stepped closer, then froze. The stalk turned, ever so slightly, toward him. He thought he imagined it, until it spoke. Not from a mouth, not with sound, but with breath inside his mind. "You left me." He backed away. The stalk leaned forward, following him without moving. "You promised, but you didn't cry." His knees buckled. The voice inside him was not that of a stranger. It was familiar, high, young, female. He fell to the dirt. "Who are you?" he whispered. And the stalk answered, "Your grandmother's first daughter." His breath caught. Memories twisted and collapsed. His grandmother had only spoken of one child, his mother. But now, she was supposed to bear twins, but only one was born. They buried the other in a jar beside the field, told her it would keep the crops safe. But I heard everything. The stalk bloomed, slowly. At the top, a soft bulb opened, revealing a small face. Not detailed, not full, but shaped enough to be real. Eyes closed, mouth sealed, no features except one, a tiny scar above the lip. His mother had the same scar, and she never said why. I was the seed they wanted, but your grandmother grieved in silence. She never told anyone. She never cried. And so the soil kept me, half grown, half dead, waiting. The stranger fell forward, hands sinking into the earth. The ground was warm again, and now wet, sticky with sap and something thicker. He looked down. His palms were coated in milk-white fluid like amniotic tears, and below the surface, roots moved. Not like plants, like fingers. The clay-eyed girl appeared at the edge of the field. She didn't approach, only watched, then slowly lifted her hand and pointed to the seedling. "She's not alone anymore. You heard her. That means she's coming back." "Back?" he asked. "How?" The girl turned her palm upward. Resting in it was a tooth. Tiny, smooth, freshly lost. A child's molar. She let it fall into the earth. The ground shivered. The stalk grew taller. That night, the villagers gathered. They saw the seedling. They did not touch it. They did not pray. They only wept. Each brought something, a lock of hair, a worn sandal, a name whispered into the soil. They surrounded the stalk in silence, and the ash-haired woman finally spoke. She's returned, not as vengeance, but as memory. She wants the grief to end. The girl walked to the center of the field. Kneeling beside the stalk, she pressed her cracked lips to its pale stem and breathed into it. The stalk pulsed and bloomed wider. A second face formed, this time identical to the clay-eyed girl. The stranger stepped forward, realization dawning too late. You're her too, a shadow, a sister, a shape left behind. The girl nodded. She needed eyes. I borrowed clay. Now she wants to see for herself. The villagers began to hum, low, gentle. Not a chant of sacrifice, but of mourning, of acceptance. One by one they placed their hands to the earth, and as they did, the seedling bloomed a third time. At its heart, the tiny petals unfurled, not revealing a face, but a mirror, small, silvered, cracked down the center. The stranger stepped closer and looked into it, and saw, not his reflection, but his grandmother, younger, crying, a baby wrapped in red silk taken from her arms, buried, without a name, without a sound, until now. He turned to the girl. What do I call her? Call her what she was denied. Call her yours. He knelt beside the stalk and whispered into the petals. A name. A simple one. Given, not taken. And for the first time, the ground beneath him sighed in peace. That night, the wind returned to Ban Sui. For the first time in years, the trees moved, the bells rang freely, and the soil grew cold. Not dead, just quiet. As though something had finally let go. There are fruits that do not grow in sunlight, fruits that swell in shadow, fed not by rain, but by memory. Ban Sui knew such fruit, and it feared it. On the third day after the stalk bloomed, the villagers unearthed the gourds. They sprouted not in rows, but in scattered clusters, along the edge of the rice paddies, where no seed had ever been sown. Round, yellow-brown, hairline cracks along their skins, each tied at the stem with a red thread. The ash-haired woman stood before them with a knife, ceremonial, blunt, stained at the tip with old sap, or perhaps old blood. The villagers gathered in silence, carrying baskets woven from vine and grief. The stranger, now called by name in hushed tones, the grandson, the returned seed, watched from the edge of the clearing. The clay-eyed girl stood beside him, unmoving. She whispered, "They didn't bury truth. They grew it in secret." He looked at the gourds again, each one shaped slightly different, some long, some squat, some almost human. That afternoon they began the cutting. The villagers lined up before the clearing, each selecting a gourd in silence. They held them like infants. Some wept as they carried them. The ash-haired woman gestured for the stranger to come forward. She handed him a small gourd, light in his hands, warm to the touch. "She was left in this one," the woman said, "the bride who sang beneath the rice." He froze. "I thought she returned to the field." The woman shook her head. Her song was divided. Half of it stayed with the roots. The other half was grown again, to remember, to remind. The villagers gathered in a wide circle. Each placed their gourd on their lap. The blades passed from hand to hand. When it came to the stranger, he hesitated. The gourd in his hands trembled. The red thread unraveled on its own. He touched the blade to the seam, and the gourd split. Inside, a face, pressed flat, eyes closed, mouth slightly parted as if mid-breath. It was not carved, not painted. It had grown this way, delicate, almost beautiful. He gasped, and then the face sang. The sound wasn't loud, it was barely audible, but it vibrated in the chest, a lullaby soaked in mourning, a song no mother should ever have to hum. Around him, the other gourds began to sing too. Hundreds of tiny voices, all different, all echoing the same melody. The field became a choir of unborn things, of offerings once made and never named. The villagers didn't speak. Some bowed, some rocked slowly. Others stared into the faces they had carried, mouths trembling with guilt too old to voice. The clay-eyed girl whispered, "These are the echoes. You thought you were the seed, but you are only the one who returned to listen." One of the gourds began to leak. A pale fluid spilled from its open mouth, thick with the scent of old milk. The ash-haired woman caught it in her hands. "The soil fed on this," she said. "Every good season we ever had came from grief like this." He felt sick. Why did no one stop it? "Because the village thrived," she said flatly, "and those who remembered were taught to forget." Suddenly, one gourd began to laugh. High, shrill, wrong, a child's laugh, but warped, sped up, played backward. Its face contorted, the features twisting slowly as if the memory within had soured. Its mouth stretched wide, its teeth tiny grains of rice sharpened. Its song turned into a scream. The woman moved quickly, smashing the gourd with the blunt side of the ceremonial blade. The scream stopped, but now the others trembled. The field felt it too. Roots above the soil began to stir, not like plants, like nerves. "They're waking," the girl said softly. "You made them remember too much." "What do they want?" "A name, a resting place, a grief that doesn't try to grow again." One by one the villagers smashed their gourds, gently, with reverence. The sound ceased. The faces collapsed inward, like petals closing at dusk. The fluid soaked the ground. Steam rose again, this time with no scent. The stranger looked to the woman. "Is this the end of it?" She shook her head. "This is only the harvest. The sowing was done long ago, but the roots, they still run deep. And they've wrapped around your name now." The clay-eyed girl reached out, in her hands one final gourd, uncracked, untouched. She held it out to him. "This one doesn't sing," she whispered. "It listens." He placed it against his chest. It was cold, but it pulsed, with his heartbeat, or perhaps someone else's. The girl leaned in. "Bury it, not in the field, in yourself." He carried the gourd back to the granary, sat on the mat, held it close, and for the first time it spoke. One word, not sung, not cried, just whispered.
his name.
Bansul had not seen fire in years. Not true fire. Not the kind that raged. The kind that cleansed. They used smoke, incense, ash, but never flame. Because flame remembers what was buried, and fire does not lie. And now they would try to burn the field. The villagers stood in a wide ring around the cursed soil. The pale stalk in the center had withered overnight, its once soft petals now curled like burned pages. But it did not die. It simply leaned, as if listening to something underground. The ash-haired woman stood holding a torch. Its flame flickered strangely, pale blue, without heat. She turned to the stranger. "We must scorch the memory from the soil," she said, "before it grows again." "Can fire do that?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked forward, raised the torch high, and plunged it into the ground. The flame hissed. It should have spread, should have leapt from stalk to root to husk. But it didn't. Instead, the flame curled backward, away from the earth. It flickered unnaturally, then sputtered into smoke. The torch died. The ground remained untouched. The villagers watched without shock. They had known. They just didn't say. "Why won't it burn?" the stranger asked. The clay-eyed girl appeared, stepping barefoot into the unburnt field. She knelt by the central stalk, touched the soil. "Because this soil was fed by silence. Not even fire can consume what was never spoken." She looked up at him. Her voice became sharper. "Your grandmother never told her secret. Your mother never wept for her sister. And you—" She paused. "And you listened, but you haven't confessed." He stepped into the field. The villagers gasped, but no one stopped him. He dropped to his knees beside the withered stalk. "What do you want me to say?" he whispered. "That we were wrong? That we took too much? That we named our blessings while burying our guilt?" The soil beneath him trembled. Not in rage, in acknowledgement. A low hum rose from the ground. Not a voice, but breath. He reached for the torch, lit it again. The flame returned, brighter now, warmer. He held it to the earth once more. This time, it touched, and the soil began to smoke. But it wasn't fire. Not really. The smoke rose thick, black and wet. It reeked of breast milk, rainwater, and tears. Shapes moved within it. Arms, faces, whispers curling upward like incense prayers. One by one, the villagers turned away, but the stranger remained. And from the smoke, a figure emerged. Small, fragile, wrapped in red silk. Her face was a mirror of the clay-eyed girl, but her mouth was sealed, not with thread, but with roots, twisting over her lips like vines grown from grief. She stepped toward him, placed her hand on his chest, and the torch went out. Darkness fell over Bansul. No moon, no stars, just breath and memory, and the faint sound of crying. The stranger dropped to the ground, heart pounding. "Let her go," he whispered. "Please, I remember now. I remember her. I give her my name. I give her my tears. Let the field forget." The smoke thinned. The figure in silk turned, walked back toward the center stalk, and with a final exhale,
disappeared into the soil. The ground sealed behind her like water closing over a stone, and the torch, still in his hands, burst back to life. This time, it burned clean. The villagers stepped forward again. One by one, they lit their own torches. Together, they set the field alight. It blazed, not wildly, but deeply, as if the soil itself had finally opened its mouth to scream. The flames consumed the guilt, the dolls, the husks, the blood-soaked threads, and when it was over, there was only ash, pure, still, silent. The ash-haired woman stepped beside him. The fire remembered what we forgot, and it forgave nothing, but it left us peace. That night, the bells rang freely again, and for the first time in generations, no one dreamed of crying beneath the earth.
The fire was gone, but its silence remained. In Bonsui, ashes didn't scatter. They settled, soft as dust, heavy as regret. For the first time in years, the soil was black again. Not cursed, not weeping, just still. And that was when the rain returned. But it was not the kind that quenched fields or softened roots. It came in drops thick as oil, falling slowly like a sky grieving its own memory. The villagers stood in their doorways, heads tilted, arms crossed. None stepped into it. They knew this rain. It didn't wash. It remembered. The stranger felt the first drop on his shoulder. It was warm. He touched it, brought his fingers to his lips, and tasted salt. Not seawater, not sweat. Tears. The sky was crying. Not for them, for what they buried. He stood alone in the square, looking upward, as the blackened soil beneath him drank every tear that fell. The clay-eyed girl appeared beside him, barefoot, her hair slicked from the storm. "This is mourning rain," she whispered. "It doesn't grow anything. It only teaches you what was lost." "Then why does it fall now?" he asked. "Because the fire awakened memory, but memory doesn't know when to stop." The ash-haired woman called a meeting beneath the granary roof. Wet villagers gathered without speaking. The air smelled of smoke and salt and something sour, like spoiled milk left near an open grave. She unwrapped a bundle of silk. Inside, an old ledger, its pages thin and crumbling. "This is the book of the failed harvest," she said. "Every time we lost a season, a name was added, not of those who died, but of those who were blamed." She opened to the last page, blank. She dipped her finger into the puddle of rainwater near her feet and began to write. A single name, not of a child, not of a bride, but her own. The villagers followed. One by one they approached. Each dipped their fingers in the morning rain. Each wrote their name on the blank page. It filled slowly, a list of guilt, of silent complicity, of grief carried too long. The stranger stepped forward. He paused, then dipped his hand. The drop he drew forth was darker than the others. He wrote, "I was born from her forgetting." The clay-eyed girl took the book last, but she didn't write. She tore the page out, held it over the altar stone, and let the rain dissolve the ink, line by line, name by name. It didn't erase them. It fed them to the soil. "Why did you do that?" the stranger asked. "Because guilt doesn't rot when written. It rots when spoken." She placed the blank page back inside the book, now soaked, now useless, now clean. That night, the rain fell harder, and with it came visions. Not dreams, visions. The villagers awoke weeping, soaked to the bone, whispering names of those they never told anyone about. Stillborns, disappeared daughters, sons too small to mourn out loud. One woman collapsed in the square, clutching a dried umbilical cord kept in a jar beneath her bed. Another man confessed that he had been born a twin, but only one cradle was ever filled. The village had become a temple of old sorrow, the storm its sermon. By morning, the soil had turned soft again. The ash clung to it like skin, and something new had appeared. Small buds, black, shiny. They dotted the field like eyes pressed into flesh. The clay-eyed girl warned, "Do not pick them. They are not for eating. They are for forgiving." "For who?" the stranger asked. "For the ones who stayed buried and never asked to return." Later, the ash-haired woman was found kneeling in the rain, a smile on her lips, her hands buried wrist-deep in the wet earth. When they helped her stand, she said only this, "I heard her voice again, and it didn't blame me." The villagers stopped trying to dry themselves. They let the morning rain fall. Let it soak their roofs, their beds, their bones. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like permission. To cry, to name, to grieve. The stranger sat beside the granary that night, gourd still pressed to his chest, the clay doll wrapped in cloth beside him. The rain fell gently now, and when he looked to the sky, he no longer feared what might grow from his memory. He feared only silence, and that fear, at last, was enough. They said she walked again, not in dreams, not as smoke, but barefoot, through the rain-drenched soil of Ban Sui. They said her footprints left no mud, only wilted flowers, and each flower whispered. The stranger was the first to see her clearly. It was just before dawn. He'd fallen asleep sitting upright beneath the granary eaves, his back aching, the morning rain still soaking the gourd he held to his chest. And then he felt it, a hush, not silence, but a pause in the sadness, the kind of pause the earth makes when it remembers something it tried to forget. He opened his eyes, and there she was. She wasn't the clay-eyed girl, not entirely. This figure walked with more weight. Her gown of red silk dragged the ground behind her, soaked dark, as though it carried the blood of forgotten generations. Her face weathered, not by age, but by burial. Her cheeks were sunken, her lips dry and pale. Her hair matted with soil and blossoms that had bloomed inside the grave. She didn't float, she stepped. Each footfall pressed sorrow into the ground, and where her heel touched, a flower withered into bloom, its petals black, its scent familiar, like the lullaby of a mother who never got to finish her song. The villagers gathered in silence, drawn by instinct, not fear. Old men, mothers, children who had never seen her yet knew her name. The ash-haired woman approached slowly, trembling, barefoot, empty-handed. She dropped to her knees as the figure approached. "You weren't supposed to come back," she whispered. "We burned everything. We let you go." The figure stopped, tilted her head, and slowly extended a hand, not in vengeance, but in offering. The stranger stepped forward, heart pounding. He felt the gourd on his chest grow heavier. He reached inside the folds of his robe and withdrew the clay doll, cracked, damp, and warm. The figure turned toward him. Her eyes were empty sockets, not of flesh, but of memory. Yet somehow they saw. She took the doll gently, cradled it in her arms, and began to hum. It was not a song of sorrow. It was not joyful either. It was something older, a note held so long it forgot where it began, a sound that made the villagers weep, not in pain, but in recognition. She was not just one daughter, not just one buried bride. She was all of them, the ones offered to the soil, the ones never mourned, the ones never named. And now she had returned, not to punish, but to remember. The clay-eyed girl stepped forward then, no longer barefoot, no longer a shadow. She looked at the figure, at her mirror, her sister, her origin. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The girl knelt, placed a flower into the woman's hand. It bloomed briefly, blue, soft, sweet-smelling, then crumbled into black dust. "We won't forget you again," she whispered. "Not this time." The woman stepped to the center of the field, now soft with ash and petals, and lay down. No ritual, no chanting, just silence. As the rain began to fade, for the first time in weeks, the sky cleared. The sun cracked the clouds. Its first light fell upon her body, and she began to wither. Not rot, not decay. Wither, like a flower finally permitted to return to the earth. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. Each placed a small offering beside her, a piece of cloth, a broken bead, a name spoken aloud. When the stranger stepped forward, he bent low, pressed his forehead to the soil beside her, and whispered the name his grandmother had never spoken. It left his mouth like a confession and settled into the earth like forgiveness. By noon, she was gone. No body, no bones, only a shallow impression in the field, outlined with fallen petals. At its center bloomed a single white flower. No one picked it. No one dared. That evening, the clay-eyed girl visited the stranger. She no longer wore white. She no longer shimmered. She looked real and tired. "She won't return again," she said softly. "That part of the soil has gone quiet." He nodded. "And you?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I was only her echo. Now that she's been heard, I don't need to stay." He reached for her hand. It passed through his fingers, like smoke, like prayer, and then she faded. No tears, only the wind. The village bells rang that night, not in warning, but in relief. And Bon Sui, for the first time in generations, slept without dreams. Ban Sui grew quiet again. But it was not peace. It was the hush that comes after too many truths are spoken, like a body emptied of blood, still warm, still intact, but hollow. No one sang, no one prayed, no one spoke. They'd tried, but their tongues turned heavy. Their mouths grew bitter. Words fell flat in the air and died before reaching another's ears. By the end of the week, the village was silent, completely. The stranger noticed it first during the morning market, the clatter of baskets, the thud of footsteps, but not a single voice. He tried to greet the ash-haired woman. She nodded, lips tight. He called to a child. The boy blinked at him, then drew a symbol in the dirt. I. A warning or a confession. That night, the bells didn't ring, not because there was no wind, but because no one could call them. Even the clay chimes beneath the granary stilled. The stranger sat beneath the eaves, the empty gourd beside him. The flower left by the withered daughter still bloomed at the center of the field, untouched, swaying gently, as if humming a tune only it could hear. He opened his mouth to speak her name again, but it caught in his throat, as if the soil had reached upward and pinched his voice between its fingers. He found the ash-haired woman in her hut. She was writing, endless rows of names on rice paper, the dead, the missing, the born but not buried. She did not lift her head when he entered. She could not speak, but her hands moved quickly, scraping ink like prayer into the page. He took the brush from her, gently, wrote only one word, "Why?" She answered with 3. Words planted pain. The next day, the village shrine cracked. Hairline fractures spread across the idol at its center, a faceless figure carved in driftwood and soot. And from inside it, a sound emerged, gnashing, like teeth grinding on silence. The children began coughing, not from illness, but as if something were caught in their throats. The villagers began to dig again, not graves, not altars, but wells. Deep, round, dry wells, not for water, but to speak into. They whispered into them, dropped names inside, closed them again with wooden lids. The stranger asked why. The ash-haired woman handed him a scroll. On it, speak only when the earth cannot hear. He refused. He returned to the field, stood before the white flower, and shouted her name, the withered daughter, the name that had silenced generations. His voice cracked, broke, split down the middle, but the flower did not wilt. It turned, and it listened. He fell to his knees, and finally wept. The clay-eyed girl returned once more, this time not to guide, but to warn. She knelt beside him. The soil has heard enough, but you were never meant to stay here. Why? I helped. I remembered. She reached forward and pressed her thumb to his lips. Exactly. You remembered. And now you must carry it away. The grief here is too fertile. It will grow again if left unspoken, but told carefully, it might turn into warning.
The next day, the villagers gave him food, warm, fresh, silent. They walked him to the edge of the forest, did not wave, did not cry. Only the ash-haired woman placed something in his hand, a sealed scroll wrapped in ash-dyed twine. On the outside, "Speak only when the earth cannot hear." He turned to leave, and the village behind him vanished into fog, as if it had never been. He traveled for weeks. He reached another town, spoke to no one, but at night, beneath the stars, he unwrapped the scroll. Inside, a single petal from the white flower, pressed, dry, still warm, and beneath it, no words, but a smudge of old clay, a fingerprint, hers. He now tells stories, quietly, to children who have never planted sorrow. He never names the village, never gives direction, only says, "There was once a place that fed on silence and was buried by it." And when the children ask how the tale ends, he only smiles, because in truth, it never did. It simply stopped speaking.
Long after the soil stopped weeping, long after the rain had turned to mist and the bells to silence, there remained a single unlit candle. It stood alone at the center of the field, planted like a stalk, its wax the color of milk, its wick untouched by fire. No one knew who placed it there, not the ash-haired woman, not the clay-eyed girl who had faded like breath in winter. Perhaps it had grown. Perhaps it had waited. The stranger returned to Bonsui not as a boy of blood and guilt, but as a man hollowed by memory. He had traveled far, told no one the full truth, only stories, parables, warnings whispered over cracked cups and sleeping coals. But the dreams never stopped, and in each one the candle waited. So he came back, not to save, not to bury, but to light it. The village was smaller now. Homes had collapsed under their own forgetting. The granary stood, but its roof had caved in, and the chimes no longer rang. The field had grown wild. Ash blossoms sprouted in crooked clusters. Husk dolls lay half-buried in the overgrowth like forgotten children. But the candle remained, upright, unmelted, still untouched. He approached at dusk, lantern in hand. The sky was the color of faded embers, as if even the sun had grown tired of burning. He knelt before the candle. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, "I remember you. I remember all of you." And from his coat, he drew the pressed petal, white, brittle, warm as memory. He laid it at the base of the candle, then lit the flame. It did not blaze, it whispered, a thread of fire, pale gold, slow. The kind of light found at the edge of a dream, or in the final moments before death. As it burned, the air thickened, not with smoke, with presence. The ground beneath him pulsed, but not with hunger, with breath. The roots stirred gently, not to rise, not to reclaim, but to listen. The candle crackled, its light bending slightly inward, as if it burned for the dead, not the living. From the edge of the wild field, shadows gathered, not people, impressions, figures wrapped in memory. The bride in silk, the girl of clay, the faces from gourds, the children from dolls, all watching. Not mourning, not haunting, witnessing. The flame did not flicker. It held, steady, until one by one the shadows began to bow. The bride placed her hand to her chest. The clay-eyed girl wept without tears, and the dolls, those broken husks, turned their hollow eyes to the light. The stranger whispered, "You are remembered. You are named. You are no longer buried in silence." And for the first time, the soil sighed in gratitude. The candle burned low, its wax dripping not into dirt, but into the center of a flower that bloomed beneath it. A final offering, a final bloom. Then the flame went out, not with smoke, with peace. The villagers never returned. The field became wild again, but the center, where the candle had stood, remained untouched. And those who passed near Bonsui, if they dare venture close, sometimes claim to hear a lullaby, one note, held too long, and then gone. The stranger was never seen again. Some say he became the wind. Others say he was planted beside the flower and bloomed only in memory. But those who listened carefully on quiet nights, with their head near the earth, could still hear a voice whisper, "The seed that weeps only wanted to be named."